All right, so today is Saturday, May 8th, 2021, and I'm here with Bodhi Kuhnmuench, Xavier Crawford, and our narrator, Mr. Shimmick, also Bodhi's grandpa. So to start, Mr. Kuhnmuench, do you mind just telling us where and when you were born?
I was born in Milwaukee, November 26, 1944.
And where were you born in Milwaukee, or where were you growing up in Milwaukee as a child?
Well, I was born at Milwaukee Hospital. It doesn't exist anymore, but it was over on 22nd and State. Grew up on 49th and Bluemound, 4926 West Bluemound, which is near West Side, and called the Story Hill area of Milwaukee, and attended Holy Cross Grade School, which is now Pilati East. So it's about a 1.5 mile walk from our home to Marquette High, and across the Wisconsin Avenue Viaduct. So that's the neighborhood. We grew up right there next to Soldiers Home, and great place to grow up.
So you mentioned Soldiers Home. Do you mind touching up on that a little bit?
Sure. It actually, it's just to the south of us. It borders the stadium, and it was built actually as a result to build a permanent home for veterans of the Civil War. And there's some gorgeous buildings that have just been remodeled, and they're now offering them again for veterans housing for homeless vets and other vets as well, because it's right on campus next to the Zablocki Veterans Hospital. And so it's quite a complex, and I recommend you drive through it sometime to see some of these buildings. They even had a theater, an infirmary, a domiciliary, place where they had food, commissary. It's like a military installation, only it's for retired soldiers. And I can remember, going through with my parents just on a Sunday ride, and you could see veterans of the many wars that we had, World War I. I think there was a couple of Civil War veterans that were still alive in the 40s. So it's kind of neat to see that.
So was that like a popular, was that like a popular building when you were growing up? Was it still like very functional?
Well, there's probably a half a dozen to a dozen buildings. It's a real complex. But on the grounds, a little further north of the Soldiers' Home, there's this big park that fronts Wisconsin Avenue. Bluemound Road, and that's where we grew up playing football and baseball, and just a great place to hang out.
I would like to ask if you still have any friends from your grade school days that you keep up with today.
Oh, sure. A couple of them. One of them went to grade school, high school, college, and law school with me. So, in fact, one of my dearest friends, Jerry Hegarty, used to be our paper boy. And then when he got to Marquette High, I took over his paper route. He lived about 4 doors away. And throughout the years, he and I went to Marquette U as well, business school. And then we both went to law school, and he got a CPA. He wound up being a tax lawyer. And then we bought a place. We were in the same parish up at St. Eugene's for many years. So we stayed in touch. I have lunch with him about once every 2 weeks, along with a couple of other of my buddies from Marquette High. So the ties still bind after 60 years.
That's good to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good to stay tight, have close relations. Very good.
Well, we got a lot of memories of things we did, things we didn't get caught for,
Oh, yeah. It's good stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned Marquette High, Mr. Kuhnmuench.
Yeah.
You said you were the graduating class of 61, correct?
Right.
So do you mind just telling us like what high school was like for you then, and then how different it was going to school back in the 50s and 60s than it is modern day today?
Well, but Marquette High is pretty much, obviously we didn't have computers. We did have a winning football team and basketball team. We had, and baseball. We had, because at the time there was something called the Catholic Conference. And so all the Catholic high schools, rather than be playing with the public schools, we played like Pius, Kenosha, St. Joe's, Racine, St. Catherine's, Don Bosco, Mesmer, Cathedral, Dominican started coming out. So basically, you were playing other Catholic high schools because they were, which was kind of neat. And we also, the dating scene, we had something called Catholic Youth Organization, CYO, which was athletics. We had CYO basketball teams and football teams. And then the schools used to, the grade schools or churches rather, would sponsor dances. So it's not unusual to go to a CYO. We called them sock hops at the time because they were on the gym floor, and you couldn't wear shoes, as you know, on your gym floor. At least at that time, they're all wooden tile. And they'd have either a DJ or a band. And so it wasn't unusual to go to St. Robert's or St. Jude's or St. Sebastian, St. Pius, whatever, wherever the dances were that week. And you'd meet girls from obviously DSHA. Well, DS and HA at that point were still separate girls' high schools. There was also Mercy, St. Joan Antietam, which is still a girls' school here. And I'm trying to think of the other one over on the south side. And about the only way you're going to meet girls, other than at sporting events. The high school itself, pretty much we had the same, we had probably more Jesuits than you have today. We had a lot of scholastics, men who were in training to become priests, obviously. And no women. We had one woman in the whole school. That was Mrs. Connolly, who was our librarian. It really was a male-dominated school, which is okay. I mean, that's the way the history was. And a variety of different things to obviously we had put on social events as well. It was pretty much it was kind of the same experience you guys are having, except that you're more, I guess we felt it was probably a little bit more insulated from the community. You guys are more citizens of the community today, I think. I think partially because of social media, but you are aware more of the surroundings of the community that you're in. I think when we went to school, there were East Siders and West Siders and North Siders, and everybody had cliques, and you kind of hung around with the guys you grew up with. But my pitch was, and when I told Bodhi about Marquette High, I said, it's good to go to school outside of your zip code, to meet guys from other parts of the city. And that helps you grow to begin aware that, it's not just Whitefish Bay, it's not just Shorewood. And so that was a positive even when I was going to school. One of the interesting customs at the time to get around, since we didn't have licenses yet, and if you didn't get a ride or didn't have an older brother who had a license or something like that, you either rode with your parents, you took the bus or the streetcar, or you hitchhiked. And in those days, hitchhiking was as common as apple pie. And you could stick your thumb out. Usually we were wearing the Marquette High letter jackets, and people would pick you up, and usually other Marquette High grads. And so we traveled all over the community just by sticking our thumb out and picking a ride, and without any fear of anything bad going on. Sometimes it took for the kids on the east side. A lot of times they get a ride about as far down as the War Memorial, and then they'd have to thumb it again from the War Memorial down Lake Drive or wherever it is they live. But it was a way to get around. And once you got a driver's license, you were golden, except that it was difficult to get permission. I think only seniors could drive to school, and they were restricted. You couldn't leave the campus unless you had a medical reason or something like that. So when I say we were insulated, we pretty much were. I mean, we'd have outside speakers come in. You know, culturally, we had different. I remember one group. We had Ramsey Lewis, who was had a jazz trio, and they played one night for the school, and I thought that was outstanding. So they began introducing, you know, other cultural opportunities as well. But you know, your world was a little bit smaller then.
Mhm. I have a question about what your teachers were like back in Marquette.
Well, mostly Jesuits, you know, and some really good, some not so great. But we had fun with them. I mean, and we still talk about them 60 years later. They did have an impact on us.
Mhm.
I had a teacher, Mr. Schlink, who was the head of, he taught German. With a name like Kuhnmuench, I decided to take German as another language. He was also the director of the Marquette Players, and, you know, we would put on two shows every year. One would be a variety show, and one would be I remember one show was 12 Angry Men. If you remember, they turned that into a movie as well, but it had to deal with the dynamics of a jury trying to, you know, come to a verdict in a murder case. So it was difficult. If there was a play involving women, obviously we didn't have any. But once in a while, somebody would dress up, or somebody's sister would be invited in to try out for the play who was in theater. So I don't think I can't remember anybody in our class that went on to fame and fortune in the movie business, but there may be. I'm just not thinking about it right now. But teachers were, you know, we had Father Boyle, which is probably a great memory. He was the assistant principal. And in those days, corporal punishment was still available. And he had an aluminum, he had a golf club with an aluminum shaft. And he had the head broken off.
Oh.
And you would, if you had options sometimes to take swats instead of going to jug after class. And it was a particularly big deal for the athletes who couldn't miss football practice, basketball practice. So you could take a couple of swats in lieu of going to jug. And at that time, the famous statement was, "Gentlemen, remove your wallet." So you get a whack on your butt, or, you know, behind your butt. And you know, he'd patrol the halls. He was imposing. I mean, nice man. I mean, we scared to death of him. He was about 6'3", and so we all kind of, even the football players, were very aware of him. But you know, he had a chuckle. He had a good sense of humor, and the guy, he got a biggest kick, I think, of the guys he was giving the swats to, because we had some characters, as I'm sure your class has. You know, good memory.
Mr. Kuhnmuench,
Yeah.
were you yourself a troublemaker?
Well, I guess I wasn't that big a troublemaker. I did enjoy jug once or twice, and I also had a couple of swats. So the brotherhood of the swats.
There you go. For sure, for sure.
You go,
so
Andrew.
Okay, so kind of going back to MUHS, were you involved in any extracurriculars?
I was a member of the poster club, and I had been taking art at the Notre Dame Art School. The nuns had an art school downtown, and so I joined the poster club, and we did artwork for upcoming dances, school spirit, you know, whatever, you know, posters that you put throughout the, you know, we have a football game coming up with somebody. You know, if we were playing Pius, let's say, and Pius's nickname was the Popes at that time, so they were going to do bad things to the Popes. Probably pretty mild, but yeah, I was in that, and I was a server. I mean, I just helped serve mass. But I started Marquette High when I was 12. I had skipped a couple of years, and I was in an advanced placement. And so I grew a foot in high school. When I first started Marquette High, I was just barely 5 feet tall, kind of short and chubby. And by the time I was a senior at 16, I'd grown a foot. I was just a little over 6 feet, but physically, I wasn't what you call a great athlete. So no, I wasn't in any other, well, I shouldn't say that. I was on we had a bowling league, and we played at the Eagles Club just down the street on 24th in Wisconsin. And that was kind of fun. A group of, it was all Marquette High guys, and you had different teams. And that was the extent of my athletic career, bowling and bowling with the champs.
So do you want to touch up a little bit on the Eagles Club a little bit? What was it like?
Well, the Eagles Club is a beautiful facility. I don't remember when it was built, but it was a fraternal organization, not unlike the Masons or the Shriners, the Elk, and it was an athletic club. They had great athletic facilities. They had a swimming pool. They had a gym. They had a running track. Obviously, had bowling alleys, and it had also a dance floor where Marquette High put on dances. The prom sometimes went there. Marquette University had a lot of their social events there in the ballroom. They called it George Devine's $1 Million Ballroom in the Eagles Club. It was all the politicians, the government, because it was close to the courthouse and close to City Hall. It wasn't unusual to see a lot of judges, police, other government officials belong to the Eagles Club, and was pretty politically savvy. I think in the 60s it began because it was pretty discriminatory. It was pretty white. All of a sudden there was a big move, I believe in the 60s, to integrate it, and it ultimately did. But that was a number of city officials, and I think one of the judges was attacked for being a member of the club when he was hearing cases that, perhaps it was raising discrimination as an issue. And they ultimately revised their charter, but it took a while. The 60s were an interesting time to grow up, and it took us out of our little cocoon. But the Eagles Club was quite the fraternal organization at the time.
Interesting.
I don't know where they are now, if they even exist. The building is still there, as you know, it is the Rave.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been, Bodhi, I'm sure you've been there. So, but that's what it is. A number of his uncles have been there. They discovered mosh pits, which I finally got to see one day, picking them up after a concert. So, forever shocked.
All right. So coming out of high school in 1961, what did you do after high school? Was it college, or did you serve in the military?
I went right down the street to Marquette University. Again, I was 16. I was too young to enter the military. And so I went with about 90 of my fellow classmates from Marquette High right down to Marquette U, and got into the business school. And, you don't know what you're going to be. My dad was in business, and I thought, well, I might as well go to business school and see if that helps. So that's what I did. And obviously Marquette University was a heck of a lot cheaper in those days. I can't remember what the tuition was, but, you had to, I was one of 5 boys in our family, and my dad had switched jobs. And when we graduated from high school, the family joke was, you got a firm but hearty handshake upon graduation, because he couldn't help us with tuition. So he said, college is on you. And I understood it. He was going through a change in his professional life. So we all got jobs. Marquette had a great placement center, and they found us all, places to work. So everything from I worked at Harry Schwartz's bookstore to the Boston store. I got a job at Ernst & Ernst, which was an accounting firm. I worked for Robert Baird for 3 years in their mailroom. I worked for UPS, loading and unloading UPS trucks. All of those were pretty much in walking distance of either Marquette High or Marquette U. UPS used to be located right at the end of the Wisconsin Avenue Viaduct, so it wasn't that far away. And so it was you didn't think of it. I never went to spring break. I had got jealous of all the, because the campus still every year went to Florida or whatever, but, this was an opportunity to work during the, spring break and get more hours in. And, when I graduated from college, I didn't owe any money. So, and actually, yeah. So college was, quite a bit different. Again, I moved out onto campus after my freshman year, moved in with some buddies, lived next door to the Ambassador Hotel on 23rd in Wisconsin. And, and that was sort of, again, close to campus, and you could walk. It's a great walking city. We walked all over the place.
Mm-hmm. I have a question about your earlier childhood. What was your first reaction when you got your first telephone?
I didn't get my first telephone till I was, are we talking about?
Or like the first home phone?
Well, I mean, we had a rotary dial phone in our house, and so I can remember my dad on the phone, because he was at that point starting back into the insurance business and fielding calls from his insured. Somebody had a car accident or whatever, and so he'd be there on the phone. But when I needed to use it, we only had one phone in the house, and so it's kind of like, and it was a rotary dial. It was the old, and at that point we didn't have numbers. Our phone number was Bluemound 8 4189. Today that would be 258, but in those days you had, if you lived on the east side, it'd be an Edgewood or a Flagstone. North side, west side was Spring or Highland, and I forget what the south side was, but they all had, I still remember some of those crazy phone numbers. But we had party lines sometimes, because some people it was cheaper to share a phone line with another family, and so they'd be on the line, and you'd have to ask permission or let them know you'd like to make a call. Or you could listen into your neighbor's conversations. I mean, it was a little strange, but we had, if we didn't have cell phones, obviously, we had pay phones all over the place. I don't think you can find a pay phone today. At least, the old metal boxes where you went in and the door closed behind you. So that was kind of wild. Do
you remember, do you remember when you got your first television?
Well, my dad, I remember we bought one. We were one of the first houses in the neighborhood in probably 48 or 49. And we had an RCA Victor, and they were in a beautiful wooden cabinet, be about a 10-inch screen, probably smaller than your video screen on your computer right now. And it was in black and white. And I remember looking out our window and seeing some of our neighbor kids looking into our house trying to watch the TV because we were a big deal. And, you had, and TV we had 3 stations. You had NBC, ABC, and CBS. And then we had a channel 18 later that came on. And it came on about 6 in the morning and shut down about midnight. And then you had a test pattern on all night. But they did the Star Spangled Banner when they signed off at night. So you went to sleep listening to the Star Spangled Banner. Cool. Strange things.
All right. So when it comes to television, was that before, like, you were in high school when you got your first television?
Yeah, it was in the 50s.
Oh, okay. So was television like really, really big on like getting information about the Kennedy assassination in 1963?
Oh God, yeah, we were mesmerized. That was November of '63. Everybody was around the TV. We watched it nonstop. It was covered. It was on a Thanksgiving weekend. So yeah, in fact, I saw the And then 2 or 3 days later, when Lee Harvey Oswald got assassinated by Jack Ruby, that was on live TV. You couldn't get, they you didn't have much in the way of taping. What you saw was actually happening live. So there was a sense of, holy cow, you were right there in the funeral cortege, as you watched the casket proceed down on Pennsylvania Avenue. It was gripping. You felt the loss that the family did.
So you were Catholic. Were your parents, were they Kennedy fans being Catholic?
Yeah. My parents were Catholic as well. My mom went to Holy Angels High School, and then Marquette. My dad went to Campion, which was a Jesuit high school in Prairie du Chien, and then he came back and finished at Cathedral High School. St. John's Cathedral downtown had a high school right next door, and then he went to Marquette undergrad as well. So yeah, we had a Jesuit in the family. My mother's brother, Father William Kelly, who also went to Marquette High he graduated in, I think, 32 or 33. He wound up being the president of Marquette University in the 60s. So I had the privilege of having my uncle being president of the university that I was going to. Kind of a small world.
Mm-hmm.
My mother was worried I'd get in trouble and embarrass him. So, and I probably came close a couple of times, but whatever, it's college.
For sure. And like the Cuban Missile Crisis, like during that time on the Homeland in America.
Yes.
Was your family, like, was there like angst in the air in Milwaukee?
Oh my God. I was living on campus at Marquette, and I can remember, we're going to Jesu Church, which was the campus church as well, was filled with people praying. All the confessionals were full. People were going to confession. I mean, we had imagined imminent nuclear, war. I mean, it was scary, and we were transfixed to the TV. And we were truly frightened about what might happen, and I just remember my one memory of seeing the lower level of Jesu Church and all the confessionals doing the land office business, the students preparing, because whatever it is we did in college, they wanted to be forgiven. Yeah, it was scary, scary time. And we did get awful close to a nuclear war. I mean, if you read up on that, Khrushchev, I think, didn't feel strongly towards Kennedy. He thought that he didn't feel that he was a strong president. And I think this was his test to see how far he could push President Kennedy, and Kennedy didn't blink. Because I don't think Khrushchev wanted a nuclear war either. Nobody wants a nuclear war except maybe some folks in the desert regions, because they've got nothing to lose.
Yeah, exactly. For sure.
I have another question about the Kennedy presidency. Was there anything that like really caught your eye when he was president that like made you start like liking him more, I guess?
Well, he was a tremendous speaker, and he was a great leader of. He was the first president that we had that was close to our age, that he could speak to the youth. Mm-hmm. And wasn't somebody who was like, we grew up with Eisenhower, who was a great man, but he was like our grandfather. And all of a sudden we've got a younger, active, he was 41, 42 years old, handsome, had a beautiful wife, had a dynamic family. And so, yeah, they were very newsworthy, and everybody embraced him. And he was challenging some of the old, habits and customs. And so, yeah, we were for change. He was for change. My mother, was a volunteer in his campaign when he ran for election. So my father was a Republican, my mother was a Democrat. And so they canceled one another out every year when they voted. But, it didn't divide the family. Today, politics have become a bit more divisive, and I hate to see that. I mean, the mere fact that you vote Republican shouldn't mean that I can't talk to you, or vice versa, the fact that I'm a Democrat. But some of that is, even wearing masks today has become political, which is silly, or not wearing masks.
I have a question about relating to change again. What was the first action of the civil rights movement that really caught your eye?
Well, I believe the bombings in Montgomery, Alabama, and the bombing that killed some young Black children. I believe the marches, Dr. King's marching. After I graduated from Marquette U, I moved down to Chicago, going to school at DePaul, and Dr. King marched through our neighborhood. And you saw people. We were in an Irish neighborhood, and they were pretty bigoted. And you saw them throwing things at the people marching through the neighborhood. And and then you saw the freedom fighters. A couple of them were murdered in Mississippi. We had open housing protests here in Milwaukee. We were shocked. You became aware in the 60s that things weren't fair, that people didn't want Black people living in their neighborhood. And, we didn't care, but other parts of the community apparently did. We were, we were in the city, and we had a number of Black people living in our neighborhood. It didn't seem to bother anybody in our neighborhood. But you weren't aware of the scope of how restricted and how discriminatory the housing laws were. And it was Father Grappi at the time in the 60s became involved in leading a number of these marches. And I can remember one of the marches that they had went down the 16th Street Viaduct leaving Marquette U and going down to the end of the viaduct on the south side. And they were met with kind of like the same scenes you would have seen in Little Rock or other, southern towns. And it kind of blew me away. I didn't realize that the feelings were that strong. So it kind of snapped us out of our little complacency too.
So,
during the time of the protests and MLK,
yeah,
how much of an impact did he have on you and the state of Wisconsin?
Well, he had a heck of an impact because I think when he talked to us, he was able to communicate. He was a great preacher, but he spoke from his heart and reached out to people. And I think he reached out to everyone. So in terms of, I began to feel what he was talking about. Campus at Marquette became more aware, although the same campus when I was attending also invited George Wallace to come up, because Wallace was a candidate at one point. I forget, either the 64 or the 68 election. George Wallace, the former governor of Alabama, was running for political office. And so we had all sorts of protests about that. At least Marquette allowed him to speak, but the students weren't too happy about it. But, that's, I think the thing that just, I think we learned in the 60s, I just growing up, we weren't even aware that the military was still segregated up until Harry Truman finally changed that in the late 40s. That I saw these guys fighting in the war, but we were still in segregated divisions and troops, and the army and was segregated, and that just never made sense. Couldn't understand that, and we weren't aware of it. I mean, it wasn't taught in school. The history books were pretty quiet about a lot of that, about racist background. Yeah, it's funny that we're learning more about it now. You learn about Woodrow Wilson in World War I, who wasn't exactly a fan of civil rights. He also was opposed to women voting as well. I mean, he was, from the Deep South. He got a lot of credit for the League of Nations and other things. He was a president of Princeton, but he was also kind of a racist, big racist. I could go on about that one. That's different time, different subject.
All right, so Mr. Kuhnmuench, kind of going a little bit back. So you went to college at the age of
16.
You said you graduated early, and
Yeah.
you went to law school. So do you mind telling us what the Homeland was like during the Vietnam War?
Torn apart. Half the country supported the war, half the country didn't. Obviously, the younger people, since they were the cannon fodder, weren't for it because the goals were not clear. That you never understood why we were there in the first place. We were allegedly supporting the big bugaboo word at that time was the domino theory, and we can't let the communists get a foothold in Southeast Asia. So this whole war, to a large degree, was, at least the story we were told, was to prevent the spread of communism in Asia. And if we let them, because North Vietnam was communist, South Vietnam was democratic. But it was corrupt, and didn't get any better during the war. And so, we're sending young people over to fight a war to support a government that really didn't, we shouldn't have been supporting. And they always say never enter a war if you don't know how you're going to get out of it. Well, we keep doing that, and it took us quite a while to get out of Vietnam. Nobody wanted to be the first. I mean, that was the rag that Johnson, when he upped the ante and started sending more troops in, he didn't want to be the president in charge when America lost a war. And we were losing the war. We never were winning the war, and it was a war that was impossible to be won. And the French got their butts kicked in the 50s. The same thing. They were fighting for independence, and it was the Vietnamese home country. And 30 years later, we're going to Afghanistan fighting a similar war. We're finally getting out of it. And that took 20 years to get out of.
Yeah. So do you have anybody that was close to you, maybe out of high school? Because you said you were younger. Did you have any older friends who may have gotten drafted?
Well, my brother was drafted. He was a year younger than I was, a year and a half younger than I was. We had something called the lottery system, and it tied into your birth date, but it was random. They put the numbers and they, rolled the dice, if you will. And I think he got a single digit number, like number 7 or 8, which meant you're next in line. If you got a 300 number, you were pretty good shape. And so he volunteered. When he saw that he got the low lottery number, he volunteered, and you could pick your service or what it is you'd like to go in at. And so he said, well, I'll go in as a dental assistant, because my grandfather was a dentist, and he thought, well, maybe that's where I'm going to wind up. He still wound up in Vietnam, but he was a dental assistant. At least he was located at one of the big bases. I mean, the bases still got shelled. He did still see things going on. One of my classmates from the class of 61, Pat Hayes, was a pilot and a Navy pilot. He was shot down and killed over there in Vietnam. His brother's Tom Hayes, I think he does the Marquette High photography. He does a lot of sports photography, but Pat went into the service after high school or college, and was a naval aviator. So He grew up in Shorewood. So yeah, I knew a lot of friends who served. One of my other classmates from Marquette High, Al Shanahan, was a pilot over there, but he flew the big transport planes. So he never, he may have been shot at, but he made it through. And then when he got out, because of his flying experience, he then got a job with Delta, and he flew for Delta Airlines for the next 30 years. So, yeah, it was, and the poor kids that came back, they were met at the airport by people who were protesting the fact that they were, there were signs accusing them of being baby killers and war criminals. I mean, it was personal. There were no parades for these guys coming back, and a lot of them suffered emotionally. I mean, they go through this horrible experience fighting a jungle war, and they aren't given any respect at that time. They weren't the ones that went, they were doing what they were told to do. They're good soldiers. And it was sad to see how they were treated when they came back. My brother, when he came back, my dad because my dad was a veteran of World War II. Dad took him over to, there was an American Legion post over on Prospect Avenue called the Cudworth Post at the time. And Dad belonged to it. It was a social, post. And he thought it'd be good for my brother Bill to meet the members and maybe consider joining the American Legion. And he goes into the bar with my dad to have a drink. And, my dad's introduced him around. And some guy at the bar criticized the length of his hair. And he said, "Oh, I really don't think I want to join this group." So, it was kind of probably a Marine. But at any rate, just a little vignette. Yeah, you were the country was torn apart in the '60s, both with the discrimination, the racial divide, the battles and integration, the war. You had it made it into the Olympics. If you're in 1968. One of the winners of a track star in Mexico raised his arm when he was awarded the gold medal. Tommy, trying to remember his last name, John Carlos. So yeah, and he was immediately criticized for raising his arm and signifying Black power. That was you had the rise of the Black Panthers, which frightened the daylights of a lot of people. Felt they were revolutionaries, which they were, and just a lot of upheaval going on. Life in the 50s was kind of like Leave It to Beaver. Everybody was nice, had nice stories, life was quiet. The 60s opened up, I guess I'd call it, that's when our country began to grow up, and good ways and bad ways.
I guess so. Going back to the 50s, you also lived through the Korean War. How was that like compared to the Vietnam War?
Well, everybody viewed it as something that we had to do. It was South Korea was our ally, and it was never a declared war. If you remember, you don't remember, but it was a police action that was instigated by the United Nations. So it wasn't just the Americans that went over to fight in Korea. Rather, it was a number of combined forces. It was the United Nations peacekeeping. Well, it wasn't peacekeeping, but it was a United Nations war, if you will. But the Americans took control of a lot of it. General MacArthur at the time was leading the military, and quite frankly, we weren't prepared. We underestimated the strength of the North Korean army and the fact that the Chinese were also supporting the North Koreans. We were still a little bit naive about that. And MacArthur wanted to ultimately not only invade North Korea and inflict military damage, but then he didn't want to stop at what they call the Yalu River, which was the border between North Korea and China. And ultimately, he was removed by President Truman because he wasn't following directions. Because we could have gotten ourselves into another big war, and at that point, it would have been nuclear. Could have been. We had the bomb, and MacArthur wasn't afraid to use it. He was scary. In fact, another good movie that kind of has fun with some of the stuff we were growing up with is Dr. Strangelove, which was a Stanley Kubrick film talking about the absurdity of war and some of the crazies that were involved in the government and in the military at the time. And if you have never watched it, it's a satire. Every time I see it, I have to laugh. Peter Sellers is in it, George C. Scott, and who plays a MacArthur type general. And pretty dark humor.
When you were in college it was UW.
No, I was at Marquette. I kept Marquette High, Marquette U, Marquette Law.
What was your major there, you said?
Well, I was a finance and marketing major.
And then did you eventually change your major, or did you?
No, I stuck with it. Graduated with it, took a job down in Chicago, and went to night school at DePaul. So I was using my marketing degree. I went with a company called the House of Vision, an optical company. And so I learned how to grind and cut lenses and fit frames and learn the business. The idea was that ultimately I'd move into a management position. I found out after a few months that I wasn't going to be a great optician. And Marquette's law school accepted me, so I went back up and went to law school.
Law school. And then what year did you graduate law school?
69, May of 69.
So was there anything in particular, like during your high school days, that inspired you to take on the career that you did?
Actually, no, it's kind of funny. My decision to go to law school was based on a bet with another fellow Marquette student. I hadn't even been thinking about it, and he had an extra app form for the LSAT, the law school admission test. And he says, yeah, because I asked him what he was going to do after college, and he said, well, I'm going to apply for law school. And I got an extra one if you want to give it a go. So I said, I'll tell you what, we bet a beer or whatever that, who gets in and whatever. So it was not I didn't fancy myself as a Clarence Darrow or a great legal scholar, but I got accepted, and at the time seemed like okay, let's go. There was also, I was enjoying school. I was still working, and there was a war going on, and we still had student deferments, and it kept me out of the service. So, not dodging the draft, it was legally, available to me, and I took it.
So during your college days?
Crawford, I can't hear you.
Yeah, I think you're muted.
You got muted. Crawford? I can't hear you.
I think his mic's muted right now.
All right, when he gets unmuted, we can come back to his question. So in college,
Oh, you're right.
there you go, Xavier.
All right. So my question was, what was the type of propaganda being shown and being told to you guys during the war and the draft?
Well, you had President Nixon, you had President Johnson, and then President Nixon said this war still can be won. We were fighting to keep, stop the spread of communism. And even though we knew we couldn't win, and so you were torn between that propaganda you got, and ultimately you began seeing news people going over there to cover it. And you had videos of, like Walter Cronkite, who was at the time the dean of broadcasters for CBS, was over there, and he was wearing a flak jacket and a helmet, and he was going out on patrols with these guys. And that's the first time ever that anybody had actively taped or showed battle scenes, actual battle scenes during the war. And he was trusted, and he finally came to the conclusion that we couldn't win this war. He saw what we were doing, and he ultimately did a great editorial and said this war is incapable of being won. And that, to a large degree, is what got Lyndon Johnson to decide not to run again. He said, my God, we've lost Walter Cronkite. And Johnson didn't want to be the president to be saddled with the only one who lost a war. And so he announced on nationwide TV, and I remember watching him because it was such a surprise. It was in March of 64. I said, I will not run for re-election.
68.
Was it 68?
He took over in 64 for Kennedy.
That's right, 68.
So relating to, I guess the newscasts, what was it like watching everything like unfold on like about Vietnam, like on television after work every day?
Well, it was fascinating. It caught your news and you watched it every night. But it was depressing. It was sad. You see atrocities being committed. The My Lai massacre came up during this period of time. You saw young men. You saw the body bags of our guys being packed and sent back. You saw no progress being accomplished in the fight of that war. And again, nobody could, at this point, even continue to give a reason for our continued existence there. And as we find out, Nixon didn't want to end, he could have ended the war earlier, but he wanted to run for re-election, and he didn't want to go out, he wanted to save it until after he got elected in 72, which is tragic. More, young men were lost during that period of time in a war that we were going to be getting out of, and yet he postponed and delayed peace talks. So if anybody deserves a warm spot in hell, I'd like to reserve him. I voted for him, unfortunately, too. I am a Democrat, but I have voted both ways. I voted for Nixon, but I voted for Johnson, and I voted for other Democrats as well. Voted for Bush, voted for Obama, voted for obviously Biden. A little bit of everything.
And so in 1968, you said a year before you graduated law school, there were two crucial assassinations involving Bobby Kennedy and Dr. King. Do you mind telling where you were and like what kind of emotions were going through your head during both of these very traumatic moments in American history?
Well, everything on campus sort of stopped. I mean, I remember being in the student union and they had a TV set and we were all, just shocked watching that. Couldn't understand it. People were just watching Dr. King's assassination. It was just, it didn't make sense. What? Why? And it occurs, there was a strike, was it the garbage men in Nashville? At the time, highly charged event, and yet, somebody, took him out. And then 3 months later, so Bobby Kennedy decides to enter the race since Johnson had left. And, they were going to be running against Nixon. And in fact, Bobby Kennedy was addressing a group in Indianapolis and that evening. And when Martin Luther King got shot and had to come and deliver the message that there was no race riot in Indianapolis, because he at least brought the mention and said we have to move ahead in a positive way. There were riots all over the country. And he said his brother was, it was just a shocking time. And then when Bobby was emerging as a potential winner for the Democratic nomination, having won the California primary, he walks out of that hotel and is being led through the hotel when he's assassinated by a worker in the kitchen, Sirhan, who had absolutely no political. I'm not sure what to this day. I think he was just mentally unbalanced, but he wasn't any kind of.
Supposedly he didn't like his stance on his.
Yeah. So I just never understood why, and he said, "Holy God, what next?" And everything stopped for a while. Even Nixon shut up for a while, and the politicians stepped back, and it just between that and then the Democratic convention, yet that summer was chaos because it was in Chicago, and they were trying to draft Teddy Kennedy. So you had the Democratic Party had a strong party candidate. People were trying to bring Teddy in. There was a rioting in Grant Park, which is right across the street from where the convention was being held. Mayor Daley, the original Mayor Daley, was a strong-fisted old Irish politician, and this was his way to show off his city. And we're not going to have riots in my city. So he had riot police going in and with their billy clubs and tear gas and attacking people and arresting them. And this was the first time we'd seen that up here. And it was just beating up whites as well, and
So Bobby Kennedy, he was also a big fan of Cesar Chavez. How do you
Yes.
think Cesar Chavez did with the protest towards getting Latino rights?
Well, he's very successful, but it took a long time. And I think Bobby was very instrumental in assisting him. And I think half the battle was making people aware of how those folks were being treated. Organizing them. They had leverage. They just didn't know how to use it. We have farm workers here in Wisconsin. This is an agricultural state. And we do have migrant workers that come on in every year to help with the crops. You aren't aware of that living here in Milwaukee, but there are farm workers that go from state to state bringing in the crops. And it can be everything from, peas and beans to corn or whatever. It's backbreaking, hard work, but it's seasonal. And these workers work all over the country. And they have more protection now than they used to have. So, yeah. Out west, particularly in the San Joaquin Valley, which is a big fruit growing and vegetable growing part of California, where half our, fruit and vegetables come from. It was also a hot and arid area, and they needed breaks and water, and they weren't always being treated well. So they were able to get additional protections for those employees, including insurance and healthcare.
So another very large event that happened in the 60s was obviously the moon landing. And in 1962, JFK kind of announced that they were going to try and go to the moon by the end of the decade. So what was it like kind of watching that all unfold?
We were racing to beat the Soviets. If you remember, we had you don't remember, but it was a big deal with Russia because they had launched the first satellite, Sputnik, and that's what incented us to say, we're better than they are. We can send a man to the moon. And everybody was glued on the TV when they took off. And I can remember I had gone to a show. There was a place called the Melody Top in the 70s or 60s on Good Hope Road, right next to the E-Line soccer field. And as we came out, you could see television sets all over the community as we drove home. We had it on the radio, and then when we got home, you kept watching it, and just amazing. Just here he is, one step for mankind. Just amazing. My God, we did it. So then, as we're now trying to find traffic to other planets, it's amazing how far we've come. But it was we did do it, and we did it a number of times, and we learned, and as we all do, learn so much in that process that helps us further on. The technology trickles down to our everyday life. Even computers, the computers that we use today, some of that was developed in the race to space. The using of microchips and right here in Milwaukee, General Motors had AC Delco, which built guidance systems for the moon landing. And it was located over in Oak Creek. It's no longer there anymore, but that was a big deal in the 60s. And so you had a big local interest here because that was guiding, there was a Milwaukee-based product that was guiding the moon landing.
Mhm.
Pretty cool.
So, Mr. Kuhnmuench, we mentioned yesterday that you may have had some artifacts to show us. By chance, do you have those on you right now?
Well, the only artifact that I had that was nearby was my letter sweater from, which I guess I can still fit into. But when you go to Marquette, I was on the Marquette, you can see that.
Oh, wow.
So that's, they give it to you the year you earn it. So I earned it in the spring of '62. I was my freshman year. And that was for, varsity tennis. Marquette, at that point, wasn't the tennis power. I don't know if it ever has been, the university. Marquette High has got a great tennis team. But anyway, we played local colleges, played at UWM, St. Norbert's, Milton, trying to think of some of the other schools. So it was a fun, that was the one extracurricular I had in college because I was still working. So kind of limited my participation in after school events.
Wow. Well, we're just coming up on over an hour.
Yeah.
I'll just about wrap it up.
Well, Crawford was going to ask me a question. I don't know if he ever got a chance. Crawford, you still have your microphone on mute. I didn't know if you.
I do have one more question.
Yeah.
It was like from the 1950s. How has, in your mind, Wisconsin changed and everything around you changed?
Well, Wisconsin changed in many ways, both politically. We went from pretty much we were in an agricultural state in the 50s, pretty rural. And today, obviously, we are more industrialized. And we've had Democratic senators and Republican governors. It's still kind of a split, situation. Half the state, upstate, is very conservative, very Republican. Downstate, very industrial and very Democrat. Growing up, our legislature was part-time, and it wasn't unusual. I think we had a better legislature then because it was part-time, and so you had people who were lawyers and educators and weren't full-time politicians and were able to work together to pass legislation. Today, we're kind of at a stalemate in terms of getting things done. I mean, right away, Governor Evers proposes a budget, and right away the Republicans are objecting and going to what they call eviscerate the budget. I think we know a lot more. We are still divided politically. I'm upset that we have people, the anti-vaxxers, that you can't make me do something, you know. And yet, you know, I grew up when we had polio outbreaks, and you had people in quarantine. You couldn't go out. We in the 50s, you couldn't go to swimming pools. And then the Salk vaccine came out, and everybody got vaccinated. And nobody was thinking it was a bad thing. Everybody wanted to be vaccinated from polio. Today, people are questioning whether this COVID thing is real, too, that they're worried that this vaccine is not going to work, notwithstanding the fact that there's over 100 million people who have been already vaccinated. They're not dropping like flies. There's no issues. I mean, there are probably a couple. Some people are just refusing. You can't make me do it. So I'm going to, you know, and so I don't know if we'll ever, we have had more battles over the rights, First Amendment and Second Amendment rights under the Constitution. You can't tell me what to do, you know. Well, maybe I can, you know. And, you know, you got a governor try to enforce a mask ordinance, and the Supreme Court said you exceeded your power. Yeah, so the other states are supporting the mandates. So you've got the, you know, government is, at the moment, at least in this state, isn't functioning as it should. So that's one important thing that's been happening. And the quality of people that are in government today, or a lot of them, I think is diminished. And that's my view. Yeah. So I'd like to see us go back to part-time legislature. I mean, if you remember, they didn't do anything. They didn't meet from last March up until about a month or two ago. A whole year they went without passing or meeting to even discuss any legislation. So to me, that tells me we can get along without a full-time legislature. So,
Well, that should just about wrap it up too. So thank you so much for answering all our questions and for the great interview. Anything else you guys want to say?
Oh, no. Yeah, just thank you for taking the time, Mr. Kuhnmuench.
it was fun. Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Have a good one, Mr. Kuhnmuench. Really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you
so
guys.
much.
You got it.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Have a great day.